This is the VIP Podcast, Virginia in Politics. Let's listen to host Chris Saxman explore the personalities and policies that connect the Commonwealth. The VIP Podcast is brought to you by the VCTA, Broadband Association of Virginia, and Virginia Free. The views and opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the VCTA and Virginia Free or our sponsors.
All right, this is Chris Saxman back on the VIP Podcast with our latest VIP, Delegate Glenn Davis from Virginia Beach. The VIP Podcast is brought to you by VCTA, the Broadband Association of Virginia, and Virginia Free, of which I am the Executive Director. Glenn, how are you this morning?
Doing great, Chris. How you doing?
I just heard you got a bill out of out of education and going over to finance.
I did, out of the Senate education of all things. That's awesome. I know.
You're that good.
It's a great year.
How is your year going? How's the session going for you?
It's going really well, Chris. I mean, we've obviously got a new administration in the mansion. The governor is pushing, school choice and creating more opportunities for students in schools. And I think that that's been a huge change from what we've seen in the past. And a lot of bills are starting to be talked about and getting through on those initiatives. So I think this is going to be a great year.
What is the latest updates on moving the ball on school choice? I've heard mixed.
Sure. So right now, the ball that's going forward, the furthest, is the concept of lab schools. And there's a couple different variations out there, but at the end of the day, it's basically allowing schools to create innovative opportunities. And the Senate version has it where it's with universities of higher education. What we've talked about in the House could be with private businesses like a Centera or an HCA or Newport News Shipbuilding, but to partner with entities to bring innovation into K through 12 to better prepare our students for that 21st century career as they get out of high school.
So where do the bills stand right now? You have a separate versions in the House and Senate. Are they on a path to reconciliation?
They are. The House version has come out of the House. It's in the Senate already. Okay. The Senate version came out and is in the House. So they're both on a path to get through.
How are you? How is the Democratic caucus in the House reviewing these bills? How are they taking these bills? Is it a party line partisan split? So
right now it was a party line split in the House. The Democrats in the Senate have been working a little bit more in a bipartisan manner to get something through. And at the end of the day, I think we might see a bipartisan bill come out with some good pieces. But it's a work in progress, and I think there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle interested in it. A lot of school choice advocates, Delegate Davis, don't think this is moving the ball far enough. And we see that a lot in politics, not getting enough done, it's just never good enough, cha-cha-cha. We've all heard the lines. You've been here for a while. How many, 12 years you've been here now? Ninth year, but it seems like 12.
Well, why aren't we able to why aren't school choice advocates happy with where things stand right now? Because I think they're not getting the tax credit bills that they want or the ESA bills that they want. And what's the prognosis on those going forward in Virginia? Well,
we passed out the education savings account bills out of the House. And the thought is they're going to die in the Senate. And I think the chairperson of Senate Ed has kind of already said as such. So we still have some challenges over there in a Democratic-controlled Senate. And I think that's the challenge that we're going to face this year and probably next year. So we're trying to move the ball forward on what we can move the ball forward on and having great conversations on other stuff with our colleagues across the aisle and across the chamber. But we do need to do some more work to be able to get to an end game on those other policies that so many around the Commonwealth want.
Yeah, one of your colleagues on the other side of the Capitol from the Senate, Senator Mason, we were talking about proportional seating in the Senate. Mm-hmm. They don't have that.
No.
Should they?
I think so. I think it's fair. We've done that in the House for a very long time. The seating in your committees is proportional to your ratio of Republicans versus Democrats on the floor. It makes things a little bit more reason to have conversations and compromise in the House, I think, in some cases, because it's a lot closer. In the Senate, as you know, it's a lot different, especially like on commerce, right? And so I think that it creates better discussions and requires people to have those discussions and compromise when the committees are closer in membership, as a ratio would suggest.
Yeah, the proportional seating is starting to become an impediment to the, the collaborative nature of what a legislature should be. Because you rely on your partisan ability to defeat, both parties have done this.
Yes.
Republicans are just as guilty as Democrats, but the fact of the matter is, we're at a place right now where we see the obvious benefit in the House from having a closely divided House. It's 12-10 on committees. It should be 8-7 in the Senate committees, but it's just not.
Right, and you're right. I mean, people talk to me all the time, and they say, Glenn, we should be able to get some of these bills through the Senate because it's a one-seat majority that the Democrats have, and now we can break the tie with the Republican lieutenant governor. And what we have to inform them is, if the bills got to the floor of the Senate, we can probably win. But if we need to get 3 D votes to get it out of committee, that's where the challenge becomes.
That's the challenge.
Because we don't have that proportional seating. And when you say Republicans and Democrats both do it, just for clarification, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate do it.
Correct.
The House, Republicans and Democrats have held to that proportional seating, and I think that's been a good thing.
Yeah, for over 20 years.
Exactly. Yeah, back when you were there.
Well, yeah, it actually preceded me, but we held to it. I remember Morgan Griffith, congressman, was adamant. Even though we had almost a 2-to-1 majority in the House, he was adamant that the rules should not change and we should have proportional seating. And I think it's one of the reforms that is long overdue in the Commonwealth. And I think that's something that people should be talking about more openly.
Agreed.
Because we've done all the redistricting. We've had these reforms come through. It's changed things, and people are going, yeah, okay, that's fine the way it's always has been. There was always that tension before you break through the reform. Now, let's talk about redistricting. How's your new district?
So it's interesting. There's a couple of us in that district.
A couple of you.
A couple of us. It's Chairman Barry Knight, myself, and Delegate Kelly Fowler are all in that district. So,
wow.
We got a year to figure it out, but there's a couple of new districts.
Do you think you have a year?
Well, so I'm not an attorney, and I know there's a lawsuit.
You don't play one on TV.
I don't play one on TV. Didn't spend the night at a Holiday Inn last night, but from what I'm hearing, especially as time goes on, Chris, for the courts to iron this out, the less likely it is we're going to have to run this year. And those that do have that legal background and things like this have been opining that we're not going to have to run again this year. It will be a 23 as opposed to a 22.
And for the audience, explain what this all means.
Sure. So every 10 years with the new census, we have to run under new district lines. But because of COVID, the census was not completed in time. The new lines were not in front of us in time to run under them this last election cycle last November. So the question is, should we have to run this November under these new lines since they are now available, and then turn around and to get back on our cycle, run again in 23, which would have us literally run 3 years in a row. As much as electeds, we probably don't want to run 3 years in a row. I'm not sure the voters want 3 years in a row of elections.
No, let me back up that thought. No one wants this except for Paul Goldman and I think the NAACP,
yes.
Who recently came out against it. Which does that bring when the NAACP comes out and says we want the new districts? Does that bring a racial tone to the conversation? Like the opportunity to call someone racist if they don't support the redistricting and having a new election this year?
No. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I know they're talking about some of the majority minority districts, and there's some valid thoughts around that. But I don't think that that's the tone that's coming out of this whole thing. And honestly, I think that there's still strong representation around the Commonwealth in all these districts that we have today, and we will have until 23 and continue to have.
Right.
So, I know that they've joined that lawsuit by Paul, but I don't think it adds much weight to this scenario. And I don't think, obviously, given where we are with the representation that exists now, that there's any underrepresentation or overrepresentation.
I don't think we lack for elections here in Virginia.
We do not. And, these districts were the districts that gave a rather significant Democrat majority up until this last year and in the House, and now have provided a very slim Republican majority. So when you start seeing that, and you look at the representation by ethnicity in the House, I think we've got some pretty strong districts, and I think these new ones will be just as strong.
And I don't think it would serve either. Well, I'm talking to Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are tired.
Right.
They don't want to have another one because they don't want to go through the primary process. They went through a battle, as you well know, in the statewide elections last time. And now the Democrats are saying, well, we kind of don't want it either because the national vibe isn't in our favor. Are you having those sidebar conversations like, yeah, we don't want it either?
Well, I think everyone's kind of looking for that. When you have an election, unfortunately, things get partisan. And so without the election, it allows people to come together and work together. Right. You don't have sometimes Democrats or Republicans worrying about how this going to look in a potential primary situation, right? So having that year off, as you know, allows more collaboration, I believe. And that's great to have by having that year off. Additionally, I think both sides would like to have that year off. Obviously, we just got through some pretty tough election cycles. being someone that has run 10 times in 15 years, local government, obviously statewide, these seats. I don't mind, if I got to run another year, my wife's used to it. I'm not quite sure what years I actually have had off, in the past. But I will tell you, for so many, it's not that second year in a row that gets you. Chris, this can be that third year.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people ran last year, and that's one thing. And I think if we all need to have that second year run this year, we've got the stamina, we can do it. But that third year, that's the one that's going to get everyone.
That would be the third time's a charm. The third time would be the death knell. That's just a lot.
3 years of campaigning without stop. That's Not only will it take the toll on I think on people, the candidates, but on the voters. I mean, I don't think voters want to have to deal with partisan electoral processes for 3 years in a row.
Because it's so dominant in our culture. But let's talk about the partisan nature of the General Assembly this year. People ask me all the time, what do you, because I'm an outsider, but I know the tempo of the place, the temperature as well, and you get a vibe. And this year, people ask me and they say, what's going on? I'm like, it's mechanical. It seems clinical. People are just running through the motions. And as Monty Mason said on the show earlier this month, people have to form these coalitions very quickly to get stuff done. So they're more collaborative because the majorities are so tight.
Yes.
However, there have been some partisan moments, some pretty sharp ones at that. How is that perceived? Well, first of all, do you think my view is correct, and how does that accept a more partisan attack, say when Delegate Don Scott goes after the governor?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt if you are just reading the newspapers or tuning into the floor, you think that there's a lot of partisanship going on, and obviously there is some, and don't get me wrong, and Don Scott going after the governor and some of the things, but Chris, you've been around for a long time, and once we're off the floor, we all pretty much work very well together. And when you start seeing 2,000 bills come through in 60 days, and you realize the overwhelming majority of them are unanimous, or they are very much in a bipartisan manner, they get out of the House and the Senate. So there are some things that are partisan, but as you know, a lot more of the argument isn't R versus D, it's rural versus urban, right? It's Nova versus the rest of the state in some cases. So in those cases, you've got a lot of people working across the aisle for the citizens that they represent. And on the other side of the issue are legislators, sometimes R&D, representing their constituents and voters. So I do understand, if you read the paper, there's a lot of partisanship, but that's not the full story. And we really do get along down here.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad do you think the partisanship is this year in the House of Delegates? 10 being the worst of all time.
Boy, we're probably at a 5.
The temperature is middle range.
We have middle range, and I think we have some new freshmen that have come in, and I think some of them, maybe across the aisle a little bit, thought this was Washington, and this isn't. Neither side has horns on their head, and at the end of the day, if you're going to get something done, you've got to work together. And I think some of them are seeing veterans on both sides of the aisle. We go out, we'll grab a dinner. We'll get together and talk about a bill. And we may not agree at the end of the day, but we have that collaborative conversation. So I think anytime you have a large incoming class, I think you get a little bit more of that out of the gate. It's been obviously a new administration coming in, so that kind of raises the bar a little bit.
And a different administration.
Yeah, a different administration.
Because we haven't had a Republican administration since 2012.
Right.
2012
so
session.
You're going to get the rhetoric from the opposition party, about the new administration. Accurate or not, doesn't matter. They're going to have their talking points because they have to, right? But when you have the conversations, off the floor, behind closed doors, there's a lot of stuff that I think everyone agrees that this governor is doing extremely well, and they are impressed. And I think he's an amazing governor. He's got so much already done, and has reached out that olive branch across the aisle early on in his administration. Yeah,
you mentioned, when I used to go home into the district, people say, why do you always talk about abortion? I'm like, we don't ever talk about abortion. Nope. The papers talk about abortion. The blogs talk about abortion, but we really don't, because we're not on the committee. There's 10 different other committees we can serve on. We just don't. But for a new governor coming in, had I would say, a not great poll, but I don't think it's indicative of anything else other than we have a deeply divided electorate. And I think it's very reflective of the election itself. That all said, how does the governor get a message out with limited media opportunities, because we just don't have a press corps anymore to speak of? So it's a very limited perspective that gets in the mainstream media.
It is. I mean, it is very tough. he has a press conference or something. And now, if it's a contentious issue, the media will pick it up. I mean, ending the mask mandate, right?
Right.
I mean, Senator Donovan's bill was high profile. Delegate Batten had it in the House. The media had to pick that up. And at the end of the day, that was a bipartisan move. I mean, Senator Peterson, if it wasn't for him, we probably wouldn't have the end of the mask mandates that we have today. So I think in many cases, if it's something collaborative, it's very difficult because it's not newsworthy as far as sometimes the papers don't want to, but things that are contentious do pick things up, and that's why we got so much attention on the mask issue and those bills that ended the mandate.
Is that the big win for the Youngkin so far? Administration?
So far, and I caveat so far because I think there's a lot of good stuff that's still coming. We have 2 weeks left in session. I think we're going to see a lot of other good stuff coming out. But
what's coming out? What can you tell us?
So, I mean, I think we're going to see a big win on, I think, tax policies. I think we're going to be a big win there. The grocery tax, I think, is going to be the governor ran on it. It was a huge part of his platform.
Oh, no.
He promised that tax relief. Chris, I work in the polls, and the polls I work on election day are, your lower middle class. It's people that really are that working family. And it resonated with them. They're having trouble making ends meet, especially, on the backside of this whole COVID scenario. And that was important to them, and he's delivering on it. It's going to be a bipartisan, at the end of the day, acceptance of that policy. So I think that's going to be big. I think lab schools eventually come to the right place, and that gets out. I think that's going to be big. So the governor's got a lot of good stuff that in his first year, I think he's going to get accomplished. But the most important thing, Chris, is it will be accomplished in a bipartisan manner. And I think that's the thing that needs to be highlighted the most. This isn't a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican governor and we get stuff done. This is a Republican House with a slim majority, a Republican governor, and a Democratic Senate. And the governor understands that there needs to be compromises, and we have to involve the other side of the aisle in the deliberative process to get things done. And he's that type of leader.
Especially today with things so toxic in Washington, D.C., they literally don't talk to each other.
Right.
We're looking at war in the Eastern Europe, possibly Central Europe eventually. We don't know. This is an unknown for this generation.
It is.
Then this is dangerous stuff. And I think it's one of the reasons why Virginia is so important in the world politically is because we do have an election every year. We are Virginia after all. There's four of the first 5 presidents. We wrote the founding documents. I mean, this is big stuff here. We take history and politics and government very seriously.
Definitely.
We have a place. And I think it's incumbent upon Virginia legislators to show that. And I think it's good to hear, but it's difficult to see. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so. I mean,
because no one wants to talk about we're being bipartisan. 20 years ago when I came in after 9/11, everyone was bipartisan.
Well,
that was the standard.
Yeah, and we need to be. I mean, everyone, they hear about Washington and they think that, Virginia down here, we're like that. But at the end of the day, good policies come from a bipartisan agreement. I mean, I looked to George Allen, Governor Allen, back when we had welfare reform back in the day. And you were around for that, I think, 95, 96? No. You were, okay. So, I mean, the Democrats, they had control back then. We had a Republican governor, and he worked with them to get welfare reform. And those policies are still in place today because it wasn't just Republicans saying, we're going to reform this. It was Democrats being collaborative, and those policies didn't change. Chris, you look at what the Democrats have done over the last 2 years when they had the governor's mansion, the Senate, and the House. They didn't involve Republicans in the process. They didn't say, okay, let's work on this and, let's get some bipartisanship here. So all of a sudden, there's a push to start unwinding some of these policies over the last 2 years. And you can't blame it because whenever the minority party isn't consulted and we know there's unintended consequences and you block us out, when we get control, we're going to run back to go fix it. However, if it had been collaborative like Governor Allen did back in the mid-90s with welfare reform, a policy that was the model for other states across the nation after it was done, those policies don't change because everyone's vested in those decisions.
They were at the table.
Right. So
you weren't at the table for the last 2 years.
We were not at the table for any. I mean, we got a marijuana bill out 2 years ago.
Are you putting the Democrats back at the table now?
We are. I mean, the lab school bills, the Democrats are at the table. We would not have the end to the mask mandate if it wasn't for the Democrats being at the table. And it's important because at the end of the day, it's not about a win for a year or a win for 2 years. It's a win that is consistent, that stands the test of time. So it's a good policy change that helps not only those of today, but the citizens of tomorrow and that next generation. And you have to have everyone vested and bought into those solutions. The Democrats didn't do it the last 2 years. That's why they're such, we've done unravel some stuff. But whenever we've had a Democratic governor or a Republican governor, I'll speak to Mark Warner, because Mark, I think, was very good with this as well. When you get both parties at the table, those policies live through that next administration, regardless of who has control.
Yeah, they go on.
Yes.
The people go, okay, fine, that fight's over. We got another fight to go.
And it was a bipartisan agreement.
All right, Delegate Glenn Davis, happy warrior from Virginia Beach. Let's talk about you personally. What are you doing these days? What books do you like? What movies are you seeing? Who are you following in sports? Just real quick. Got a couple minutes left.
Well, okay. So, Chris, you know, I am only married to my wife because I love the Yankees, right?
That's right.
I've got to follow that, you know. And it's, you know, sports, I have to admit, although being a Dallas fan, I was rooting for the Rams. You know, that was
good. Smart.
Yeah, love that team, love the story there, so that was great. Books wise, you know, I wish I had more time to read.
Not during the session, at least.
Not have it now. Movie wise, American Underdog. I saw that with Shelley last weekend about Kurt Warner. Okay. And we all knew some of the story about Kurt Warner. You know, and literally 5 years before winning the Super Bowl, he was literally putting, you know, stocking grocery shelves. Right. But there's so much more to that story. It's just unreal. So that was a tremendous story. Loved it.
Okay, American Underdog. We'll recommend that to our viewers, and we appreciate you coming into the VIP podcast, brought to you by VCTA, the Broadband Association of Virginia and Virginia Free. It's great to have you, Glenn. Wish you the very best during the session, and hopefully you'll be home on March 12th.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Sine Die. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chris Saxman. Thanks for coming on. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Please subscribe and share, like as well. Thank you.